My aunt posted a video with my parents, from which I learned they consider me an ungrateful freeloader, despite the fact that I paid for their comfortable life. So I cut off all contact with them and stopped the money train. The video appeared on my phone at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was lying in bed after another 16-hour workday, scrolling mindlessly through social media before sleep claimed me. My aunt Denise had posted it to her public Facebook page, some rambling 20-minute recording from what looked like my parents' living room. I almost scrolled past it. Almost. But something made me tap the play button. Maybe it was the thumbnail showing my mother's face mid-laugh, or maybe it was just the universe's twisted sense of timing. Either way, I pressed play. The first few minutes were boring family chatter. Denise was visiting from Arizona, apparently, and she decided to document the entire visit like some kind of amateur filmmaker. My parents sat on the cream leather sectional I'd bought them 2 years ago, drinking coffee from the expensive Italian espresso machine that had been my Christmas gift. Then the conversation shifted. "I just don't understand young people these days," Denise said from behind the camera. "They're so entitled." My mother, Patricia, nodded enthusiastically. "Tell me about it. We raised our daughter to be independent, gave her everything, and now she acts like we owe her something." I sat up straighter in bed, my heart beginning to pound. My father, Gerald, chimed in. "The girl lives rent-free, basically. Hasn't contributed a dime to this household in years. Just takes and takes." The phone nearly slipped from my trembling hands. Denise's voice came again, sympathetic and enabling. "That must be so hard for you both. After everything you've done for her." "It is," Patricia said, and I watched her take a delicate sip from her mug. "We've tried to teach her about gratitude, about responsibility, but she's just a freeloader at this point. Gerald and I work so hard to maintain this lifestyle, and she contributes nothing." I had to pause the video. My vision had gone blurry, and it took me a moment to realize I was crying. Not sad tears. These were tears of pure, crystallized rage. Let me back up and give you the full picture. My name doesn't matter for this story, but my bank account sure does. I'm 32 years old, and I've been supporting my parents financially for the past 8 years. Not partially. Not helping out occasionally. Completely and entirely supporting them. It started when I was 24. I just landed my first major promotion at the tech startup where I worked as a software engineer. The company was about to go public and my stock options were looking very promising. Around the same time, my father got laid off from his middle management position at a manufacturing plant. He was 58, and finding equivalent work proved impossible. My mother had never worked outside the home. She'd always been a homemaker, which was fine, but it meant their household income dropped to zero overnight. They were facing foreclosure on their modest 3-bedroom house. The panic in my father's voice when he called me that first time still echoes in my memory. I'd never heard him sound so defeated, so scared. He was always the strong one, the provider, the man with a plan. So I stepped up. I paid off their mortgage completely with my signing bonus and first stock sale. $340,000, gone in an instant. But they were my parents, and they needed help. That's what family does, right? Then came the property taxes. The utilities. The car payments when their old vehicles died. The medical bills that their inadequate insurance didn't cover. The home repairs. The groceries. The clothes. The entertainment. Everything. I told them it was temporary. Just until Dad found something new, or until they figured out their retirement situation. They nodded and thanked me profusely. Patricia cried and called me her angel. Gerald hugged me and said I was the best daughter a man could ask for. 2 years passed. Then 3. My father stopped looking for work altogether. Why would he? I was covering everything. My mother started redecorating their house, upgrading appliances, taking up expensive hobbies like oil painting and gourmet cooking. I raised my concerns gently. "Dad, have you thought about maybe some part-time work? Just to stay active?" He'd wave me off. "At my age? Nobody wants to hire a 60-year-old. Besides, I've worked hard my whole life. I deserve to enjoy these years." Meanwhile, I was working myself into exhaustion. I'd moved up to senior engineer, then team lead, then engineering director. More responsibility, more hours, more stress. But also more money, which apparently my parents needed to maintain their increasingly luxurious lifestyle. The cream leather sectional. The Italian espresso machine. The new granite countertops. The landscaping service. The house cleaner who came twice a week. The premium cable package with every sports channel available. The country club membership. The weekend trips to wine country. Every month, I transferred money into their account. It started at $3,000. Then 5. Then 8. By the time of Denise's video, I was sending them $12,000 monthly. Not including the emergency expenses that cropped up constantly. A crown for my mother's tooth. New tires for the car I bought them. A fence repair. A new HVAC system. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment that cost me $2,000 a month. I drove a 7-year-old Honda. I bought my clothes at Target. I hadn't taken a vacation in 4 years. But my parents had their dream retirement, and I told myself their happiness was worth my sacrifice. Sitting there in bed at 3 in the morning, watching my mother call me an ungrateful freeloader, something inside me shattered and reformed into something harder, colder. I watched the rest of the video. All 20 minutes of it. Denise asked about their finances, and Patricia launched into this elaborate fiction about how they were barely scraping by despite my father's small pension and their modest social security. Neither of those things existed. Gerald had been at his job for only 12 years when he was laid off, not long enough for any meaningful pension. He was only 66 now, but he'd stopped working at 58 and had minimal social security earnings as a result. He'd filed for early benefits at 62, but after 8 years of not contributing, his monthly check was barely enough to cover groceries. They had nothing. They were nothing without my money. And they were telling their family that I was a burden to them. Gerald complained about me living rent-free in their house. I hadn't lived with them since college, 14 years ago. He grumbled about me eating their food and using their utilities. I visited maybe 4 times a year, and I always brought expensive gifts and groceries when I came. Patricia mentioned how they'd paid for my college education, and I'd never even thanked them. They'd contributed exactly $8,000 to my education through a small savings account they'd started when I was born. I'd covered the remaining $72,000 through scholarships, grants, and loans that I'd finished paying off 3 years ago. The lies kept coming. I was difficult. I was selfish. I had no respect for everything they'd sacrificed for me. I'd never amounted to much professionally, just some computer job that barely paid the bills. Denise ate it up, offering sympathy and validation at every turn. I watched until the end, until Denise finally turned off the camera with some comment about ungrateful children these days. Then I sat in the dark and made a plan. First, I screenshotted everything. The video, the comments, several family members had watched it and added their own criticisms of me, every frame. I downloaded the video file itself before Denise could think to make it private. Second, I logged into my bank account and scheduled the cancellation of the automatic transfer set to process in 3 days. Third, I opened my email and began composing a message. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent 6 hours documenting everything. Every payment I'd made over 8 years. Every mortgage payment, every utility bill, every car payment, every insurance premium, every property tax installment, every grocery delivery, every home repair, every medical bill. I had kept meticulous records because that's the kind of person I am. The total came to just over $960,000. Nearly $1 million in 8 years. I created a spreadsheet. I attached bank statements. I compiled a timeline showing the dates of their claims about my freeloading versus the dates of my actual payments. I took screenshots of text messages where they thanked me for money, asked for more money, promised to be more careful with money. As dawn broke, I had a 47-page document outlining the complete financial relationship between my parents and myself. I sent it to everyone. My Aunt Denise. My Uncle Robert. My cousins Jessica, Mark, and Timothy. Every family member who'd commented on that video or had been tagged in it. I sent it to my parents' neighbors, the ones who'd been in their social media photos, the ones who'd witnessed their lavish lifestyle. I sent it to the country club where they were members. The subject line read, "The truth about the ungrateful freeloader." The body of the email was brief. Please find attached documentation of the financial support I've provided to Patricia and Gerald over the past 8 years. You'll note this totals nearly $1 million. I've also included the video posted by Denise in which they describe me as an ungrateful freeloader who contributes nothing to their household. I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions about who has been taking advantage of whom. Effective immediately, this financial support has ended. I wish them the best in their newly independent retirement. I hit send at 6:47 a.m. Then I blocked my parents' numbers, blocked their email addresses, and blocked them on every social media platform I used. I called in sick to work. For the first time in 3 years, I took a personal day. I needed it. My hands were shaking, my stomach was in knots, and I kept bursting into tears at random intervals. Around 10 that morning, my phone started ringing from unknown numbers. I didn't answer. The voicemails piled up. Denise, crying and apologizing. Uncle Robert, angry and defensive. My mother, hysterical and incoherent. My father, trying to sound reasonable and failing. I deleted them without listening to more than a few seconds of each. The emails came next. Backtracking, explaining, justifying. Denise claimed she'd misunderstood the situation. My mother insisted they'd been joking, that I was taking things out of context. My father suggested I was having some kind of breakdown and needed help. Several cousins reached out with messages that ranged from apologetic to accusatory. Jessica wrote a long email about how I was tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. Mark sent a short message calling me petty. Timothy, surprisingly, wrote to say he'd always suspected something was off about my parents' story and he was sorry he hadn't questioned it sooner. I responded to no one. By day 3, the situation had escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. My mother showed up at my apartment building. The doorman called up to ask if I wanted to allow her access. I could hear her voice in the background, shrill and demanding. "Tell her I'm not home," I said. "Ma'am, your daughter says she's not available," the doorman said diplomatically. Patricia's voice rose to a shriek. "I know she's there. I'm her mother. You can't keep me from my own daughter. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises or I'll need to call security." The line went dead. I stood by my apartment door, half expecting her to somehow materialize in the hallway. She didn't. 20 minutes later, the doorman called back to confirm she'd left, though not without causing a scene that had other residents complaining. My hands were trembling as I poured myself a glass of wine. It was 11 in the morning, but I didn't care. The audacity of her showing up, acting like the victim, demanding access to me after what she'd said was almost impressive in its shamelessness. That afternoon, I received an email from my cousin Jessica that was longer and more detailed than her first message. She'd apparently done some digging after receiving my documentation. "I spoke with Mom about the timeline," she wrote. She confirmed that Aunt Patricia and Uncle Gerald have been living pretty lavishly for years. We all assumed Uncle Gerald had some kind of pension or investment income. Mom says she even asked once, and Aunt Patricia got really defensive and changed the subject. "I'm starting to understand this is more complicated than I thought. But you have to understand, that video made it sound like you were living with them and taking advantage. We didn't know. How could we have known if nobody told us?" The answer to that question seemed obvious to me. They could have asked. They could have questioned a narrative that painted me as a villain without any actual evidence. They could have given me the benefit of the doubt after knowing me for 32 years. But they hadn't, and that told me everything I needed to know about where I stood in their priorities. The fourth day brought a surprise. My boss, Kenneth Rothman, called me into his office. My stomach dropped. Had my parents somehow contacted my workplace? "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his desk. "I wanted to check in with you. You called in sick earlier this week, which is unusual for you. You seem distracted when you are here. Is everything okay?" I debated how much to tell him. Kenneth and I had a good working relationship, but it was professional. We didn't discuss personal matters beyond surface-level pleasantries. Something in his expression, genuine concern rather than professional obligation, made me decide to be honest. "I'm dealing with a family situation," I said. "It's complicated, but the short version is that I discovered my parents have been badly misrepresenting our relationship to extended family while I've been supporting them financially for years. I've cut them off, and there's been fallout." Kenneth leaned back in his chair. "How long have you been supporting them?" 8 years. Nearly $1 million total. His eyebrows shot up. "That explains some things." "What do you mean?" "You've turned down promotions that would have required relocation. You've liquidated stock options that most people in your position would hold. You work more hours than anyone else on the team, and I've always wondered why someone with your salary seems so reluctant to take advantage of company benefits like the executive retreat or professional development opportunities that require travel." I hadn't realized how much my situation had been affecting my career decisions. Hearing it laid out like that was jarring. I needed the immediate cash, I admitted. And I couldn't leave the area because my parents needed me nearby for emergencies. Or at least, that's what I thought at the time. And now? Now I'm realizing I put my entire life on hold for people who didn't appreciate it and actively resented me for it. Kenneth nodded slowly. For what it's worth, you're one of the most talented engineers I've worked with. If you ever want to reconsider some of those opportunities you passed up, my door is open. We've got a new initiative starting in the spring that could use someone with your leadership skills. It would mean more responsibility, but also significantly more compensation and equity. The conversation shifted something in me. I'd been so focused on what I'd lost that I hadn't considered what I might gain. Freedom from my parents' financial demands meant freedom to make career choices based on what was best for me, not what allowed me to maximize my cash flow. I'd like to hear more about that initiative, I said. The meeting ended with Kenneth promising to send me details about the new project. As I walked back to my desk, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, excitement about my professional future. That evening, Timothy called. "You need to know what's happening," he said without preamble. Uncle Gerald tried to take out a loan using the house as collateral. The bank ran a credit check and found out the house is owned free and clear but that they have zero income. They denied the loan application. "Good," I said. "They're panicking." Aunt Patricia called Mom crying, saying they're going to lose everything. Mom felt bad and offered to lend them some money, but Dad shut that down quick. He said if you, their own daughter, walked away after seeing the real situation up close, then the rest of us should think very carefully before getting involved. Your dad sounds like a smart man. He is. He's also angry on your behalf. He told Aunt Patricia that what she said in that video was unforgivable, and that you had every right to protect yourself. Hearing that someone in my family was defending me, someone I barely knew beyond holiday gatherings, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. Tell your dad thank you. I will. But there's more. Denise took down the video, but not before a bunch of people downloaded it or shared it. It's making the rounds in some family group chats. People are taking sides. What sides are there to take? I have documentation. You'd be surprised how many people think you should forgive them anyway because they're your parents. Aunt Lorraine, Uncle Gerald's sister, sent this long message about honoring thy father and mother. Jessica's husband called you selfish for cutting off elderly people. But just as many people are saying you did the right thing. It's causing a whole family civil war. The idea of extended family members I saw once a year at Thanksgiving having heated debates about my life would have seemed absurd a week ago. Now it just felt exhausting. Let them argue, I said. My decision is made. Over the following weeks, I learned more details about my parents' situation through Timothy's updates. They'd tried to get Gerald's old job back, or something similar, but his 8-year employment gap was impossible to explain to potential employers. Patricia's application at the grocery store had been a humiliating process for her, according to Timothy's mother, who'd heard it secondhand. She'd never had a resume before, never had a job interview. She was 63 years old and completely unprepared for the workforce. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy. But then I'd remember the video, remember her voice dripping with contempt as she called me a freeloader, and the sympathy evaporated. They were adults. They'd made choices. They were experiencing consequences. My mother made one more attempt to reach me, this time through a letter sent to my workplace. I have no idea how she got the address, though I suspected Denise might have helped despite her apology. The letter was 6 pages long, handwritten on the expensive stationery I bought her for Mother's Day 3 years ago. She started with guilt. How could I abandon them in their time of need? Hadn't they raised me, fed me, clothed me? Didn't I remember all the sacrifices they'd made when I was young? Then came the excuses. The video was taken out of context. She'd been tired, stressed about money. She hadn't really meant what she said. Denise had been complaining about her own kids, and Patricia had just been commiserating. The 3rd page shifted to anger. I was cruel, heartless, vindictive. I was punishing them for one tiny mistake. I was destroying their lives over nothing. What kind of daughter does that to her parents? Pages 4 and 5 cycled back to guilt, with added religious overtones. I had a duty to honor my parents. I was violating everything they'd taught me about family loyalty. My grandmother would be rolling in her grave if she knew how I was treating them. The final page was a desperate plea. They were going to lose their home. They couldn't afford their medications. They were facing poverty in their old age. Please, please, please reconsider. They'd do anything. They'd apologize publicly if that's what I needed. Just please don't leave them destitute. I read the letter twice, sitting in my car in the parking garage of my office building. Then I tore it into small pieces and threw it in the trash. The fact that she'd sent it to my workplace, potentially exposing my private family drama to my colleagues, was just another manipulation. She was counting on my embarrassment, My desire to keep my professional and personal lives separate, to pressure me into responding. It didn't work. That night, I drafted an email to my attorney, a sharp woman named Fiona Bradshaw who I consulted when my parents' lawyers sent the first threatening letter. I forwarded her my mother's letter and asked her to draft a cease and desist. No more contact at my home, my workplace, or through third parties. Any further attempts would result in a restraining order. Fiona's response was swift and satisfying. I'll have this ready by tomorrow afternoon. For what it's worth, this letter from your mother is a textbook example of manipulative abuse tactics. Save it. If they do escalate, documentation like this will be helpful. The cease and desist was delivered 3 days later. Timothy told me it caused another meltdown. My mother claimed I was being dramatic. My father said I'd gone too far, that there was no coming back from legal action. He was right about one thing. There was no coming back. But that wasn't because of the legal letter. That ship had sailed the moment I watched that video. Work became my refuge. The new initiative Kenneth had mentioned turned out to be a complete restructuring of our product development pipeline. It was challenging, complex, and required every bit of my attention. For 10 to 12 hours a day, I didn't think about my parents at all. I lost myself in code architecture, team coordination, and strategic planning. My performance reviews, which had always been strong, became exceptional. Without the constant background stress of wondering how I'd cover my parents' next emergency expense, my focus sharpened. Ideas came easier. Solutions appeared where I'd been stuck before. Kenneth noticed. Whatever you're doing differently, keep doing it. You've been on fire these past 2 months. What I was doing differently was living for myself for the first time in 8 years. The difference was remarkable. I also started saying yes to social invitations I'd always declined before. Happy hours with colleagues. A weekend hiking trip organized by the company's outdoor club. A concert with my friend Melissa, who I'd been slowly drifting away from because I never had time or money for outings. It's good to have you back, Melissa said as we waited for the show to start. I was worried about you for a while. You seemed so worn down. I admitted. But things have changed. I gave her the abbreviated version of the story. Her reaction was gratifying. Your parents said what? After you'd been supporting them? That's insane. It felt pretty insane when I found out. And you're really done with them? Like, permanently? Permanently. She shook her head in amazement. Good for you. Honestly, good for you. I think a lot of people would cave under the family pressure. There was pressure, certainly. A few distant relatives tried their own interventions. My father's cousin Bernard called me out of nowhere to lecture me about family obligations. My mother's childhood friend Nancy sent a Facebook message about forgiveness and healing. Each time, I either didn't respond or sent a brief message saying my decision was final and not up for discussion. The people who knew the full story supported me. The people who didn't know the full story but decided to judge anyway weren't people whose opinions I valued. 3 months after cutting contact, I had a revelation during a therapy session. Dr. Howard had asked me to describe my relationship with my parents before I'd started supporting them financially. It was fine, I said automatically. Then I paused. Actually, I don't know if that's true. What do you mean? I always felt like I was trying to earn their approval. Nothing was ever quite good enough. When I got a B in high school, they asked why it wasn't an A. When I got accepted to a good college, they mentioned the better ones I didn't get into. When I got my first job, they seemed disappointed it wasn't at a more prestigious company. And when you started giving them money, they were proud of me. Finally. They told people about my success, bragged about how well I was doing. I thought I'd finally made them happy. Dr. Howard gave me that look, the one that meant she wanted me to follow the thought to its logical conclusion. Oh, I said quietly. They weren't proud of me. They were proud of what I could do for them. That's a painful realization. Yeah. I sat with it for a moment. I was never going to be enough for them, was I? Unless I was useful. Based on what you've told me, that seems accurate. The grief that washed over me wasn't for the relationship I'd lost. It was for the relationship I'd never actually had. I'd been chasing a fantasy version of parental love that didn't exist and never had. That session marked a turning point. The guilt that had been nagging at me, the little voice questioning whether I was being too harsh, finally went silent. You can't be too harsh in setting boundaries with people who never valued you beyond your utility. I started thinking about my future differently. I'd spent my 20s and early 30s in survival mode, working endlessly to keep my parents afloat. Now, At 32, I had the chance to figure out what I actually wanted from life. I wanted travel. Real travel, not just weekend trips. I wanted to see Europe, Japan, New Zealand. I started planning a 2-week vacation to Italy for the spring, something I'd never have considered when every penny was earmarked for my parents' lifestyle. I wanted hobbies that cost money. I signed up for piano lessons with a highly recommended instructor. I bought a decent camera and enrolled in a photography workshop. I joined a gym with good equipment and actually used the membership I was paying for. I wanted to date without the burden of my complicated family situation hanging over every relationship. When I met Lucas at a mutual friend's barbecue, I felt ready for something real in a way I hadn't before. Our first date was coffee that turned into a 4-hour conversation. Our second was dinner and a movie. By the 5th date, when I told him about my parents, I wasn't looking for validation or sympathy. I was just sharing my history with someone I was growing to care about. His response was perfect because it was simple. That must have been really hard. I'm glad you got out of that situation. No judgment. No questions about whether I should reconsider. Just acknowledgement and acceptance. I also reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during the years of supporting my parents. College roommate Vanessa, who I hadn't seen in 6 years. My former co-worker Dante, who'd moved to a different company and who I'd stopped having lunch with because I could never spare the time or money. These people remembered a version of me from before, when I'd been lighter, more spontaneous, more present. Spending time with them reminded me of who I used to be and showed me glimpses of who I could become again. The financial recovery was slower than I'd hoped but steadier than I'd feared. I maxed out my retirement contributions. I set up automatic investments. I built an emergency fund that was actually for my emergencies, not my parents'. I met with a financial planner who helped me create a 10-year strategy for building real wealth. You're in a better position than you think, she told me. Yes, you're behind where you could have been, but you have a high income, low expenses now, and years ahead of you to invest wisely. You'll be fine. Fine seemed like such a small word for what I was feeling. I wasn't just fine. I was free. Instead, I contacted 3 financial advisors and set up consultations. I'd been so focused on supporting my parents that I'd neglected my own financial future. I had retirement accounts, sure, but they were underfunded for someone with my income. I had equity in the company I worked for, but I'd sold so much of it to pay for my parents' lifestyle that my stake had diminished significantly. It was time to rebuild. Time to invest in myself. I also contacted a therapist. The first appointment was awkward and tearful, but Dr. Cassandra Howard turned out to be exactly what I needed. She helped me understand that I'd been caught in a cycle of manipulation and obligation, that my parents had exploited my love and sense of duty. They trained you to be their safety net, she said during our 3rd session. And then they resented you for it because it reminded them of their own failures. The insight was painful but liberating. 3 weeks after I cut off contact, a letter arrived from a law firm. My parents were threatening to sue me for elder abuse and financial exploitation. They claimed I'd promised to support them for life, that they'd made decisions based on that promise, and that my sudden withdrawal of support constituted abandonment. I laughed when I read it. Actually laughed, a slightly manic sound that startled my cat. I called the attorney listed on the letter, a man named Jonathan Pierce. He sounded young and uncertain when he answered. Mr. Pierce, this is the ungrateful freeloader your clients claim has been exploiting them. Before you proceed with any legal action, I'd like to send you some documentation. I sent him everything. The spreadsheets, the bank statements, the video, the timeline. I sent him the texts where they asked for money. The emails where they thanked me for money. The records showing they had no income of their own. 3 days later, I received another letter from Mr. Pierce. It was a brief note informing me that his firm was withdrawing from representation of Patricia and Gerald due to irreconcilable differences regarding the facts of the case. Between the lines, I could read his realization that my parents had lied to him completely. I felt a grim satisfaction at that. The phone calls eventually stopped. The emails dwindled. My family, such as it was, went quiet. I heard through Timothy, who'd become my sole contact with that side of the family, that my parents were in serious trouble. The mortgage I'd paid off was free and clear, but they couldn't afford the property taxes, which were substantial on their upgraded home. They couldn't afford the utilities or the maintenance. They were trying to sell the house, but the market was soft, and they owed money on the cars I'd bought them. My father had applied for Social Security, but because he'd stopped working at 58, his benefit was minimal. My mother had never worked enough to qualify for her own benefit. They were looking at food stamps and Medicaid. Timothy asked if I felt bad about it. I thought about that question for a long time before answering. No, I finally told him. They made choices. They chose to stop working, to live beyond their means, to lie about me to everyone we know. They chose to call me a freeloader while spending my money. These are the consequences of their choices. That seems harsh, Timothy said, though his tone was more contemplative than judgmental. Maybe. But you know what's harsh? Working yourself sick to support people who have nothing but contempt for you behind your back. That's harsh. He didn't argue with that. 6 months after I cut them off, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. I'd started answering unknown calls again, figuring the storm had passed. It was a social worker from the county. She informed me that my parents had applied for emergency assistance and had listed me as their daughter. She wanted to know about my ability and willingness to provide financial support. I supported them completely for 8 years, I told her. I gave them nearly $1 million. They told everyone I was a freeloader and contributed nothing to their household. I have documentation of all of this if you need it. I am not willing to provide any further support. The social worker was quiet for a moment. I see. Can you send me that documentation? I did. I never heard from her again, but Timothy told me later that my parents had been approved for various assistance programs. They were getting by, barely. They'd sold their house at a loss and moved into a small 2-bedroom apartment in a less desirable neighborhood. They'd sold one of their cars. My mother had taken a part-time job at a grocery store. My father was doing odd jobs through a senior employment program. They were living the life they should have been living all along, instead of the fantasy retirement I'd funded. A year after everything imploded, I ran into Denise at a restaurant. I was there with colleagues, celebrating a successful project launch. She was alone, waiting for a takeout order. Our eyes met across the room. She looked older, more tired. Guilt suited her poorly. She approached my table hesitantly. "Can we talk?" I excused myself from my colleagues and stepped outside with her. "I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I didn't know. About the money, about everything. They lied to me too. You posted that video publicly," I said. "You didn't verify a single thing they said. You just believed the worst about me and broadcast it to everyone." "I know. I was wrong. I've told Patricia and Gerald that I won't be visiting anymore. I can't condone what they did to you." I studied her face. The apology seemed genuine, but I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no forgiveness. Just emptiness where our relationship used to be. "I appreciate you telling me," I said. "But I don't think we have anything more to say to each other." "Your mother misses you," Denise tried. "My mother called me a freeloader while drinking coffee I paid for, sitting on furniture I bought, in a house I saved from foreclosure. My mother can miss me all she wants. That's her problem now, not mine." Denise nodded slowly and walked away. I went back inside and rejoined my colleagues. Someone made a joke, and I laughed, and the moment passed like it had never happened. These days, my life looks very different. I still work hard, but I'm working for myself now. My retirement accounts are healthy and growing. I bought a small house last month, the first property I've ever owned. It's nothing fancy, but it's mine. Completely and entirely mine. I've started dating someone, a man named Lucas who works in the medical field. When I told him about my parents on our 5th date, expecting judgment or horror, he just pulled me close and said, "You did what you had to do. Anyone who says otherwise doesn't understand." I'm sleeping better. The anxiety that used to wake me at 3 in the morning, worrying about how to cover my parents' latest expense, has evaporated. I have hobbies now. I've taken up hiking and photography. I'm learning to play the piano. I'm reading for pleasure again. Timothy sends me updates occasionally. My parents are still struggling but surviving. They've never apologized. According to Timothy, they've spun a new narrative where I'm the villain who abandoned them in their time of need. Some family members believe it. Others know better but stay quiet to keep the peace. I don't care anymore. That whole side of the family could disappear tomorrow, and my life would continue unchanged. Dr. Howard says I'm doing remarkably well. The grief I felt over losing my parents, even parents who clearly didn't value me, was real and valid. But I've worked through it. I've accepted that the parents I thought I had, the ones I worked myself to exhaustion for, never really existed. They were a fantasy, a projection of who I wanted them to be. The real Patricia and Gerald were people who saw their daughter as a resource to be exploited, who felt no gratitude for the life I gave them, who found it easier to paint me as a burden than to acknowledge their own failures. Letting them go was the best decision I ever made. Sometimes people ask if I'll ever reconcile with them. The answer is no. There's nothing to reconcile. You can't rebuild a relationship on a foundation that was never real to begin with. You can't repair damage this deep, this fundamental. They showed me exactly who they were, and I finally believed them. The money is gone. I made my peace with that. Consider it payment for an education, setting boundaries and recognizing manipulation. A very expensive education, but some lessons are worth the cost. I have a new family now. Friends who show up when I need them. Colleagues who respect and value my work. Lucas, who treats me like a partner rather than an ATM. A therapist who helps me navigate the complicated waters of trust and self-worth. Timothy, the one blood relative who chose to see the truth. That's enough. That's more than enough. My life belongs to me now. My money, my time, my energy, my love. All of it is mine to spend as I choose, and I choose to spend it on people who deserve it. People who appreciate it. People who would never dream of calling me a freeloader while spending money I earned through 16-hour workdays and endless sacrifice. The video that Denise posted still exists somewhere in the digital archives of the internet, I suppose. I've never looked for it. I don't need to see it again. I know what it showed me, what it taught me, what it freed me from. In a twisted way, I'm grateful to Denise for posting it. If she hadn't, I might have continued the charade for years more. I might have worked myself into an early grave trying to please two people who were fundamentally unpleasable. I might never have discovered what it feels like to live for yourself instead of for the approval of people who will never give it. So here's to ungrateful freeloaders. May we all find the courage to stop apologizing for existing, to demand the respect we deserve, and to walk away from anyone who can't provide it. Even if it's family. Especially if it's family. Because at the end of the day, being alone is better than being used. And being free is better than being needed by people who don't actually love you. I learned that lesson the hard way, but I learned it. And I'll never forget it again.